Hi guys, it's Blackie for Shaman's Forge Woodcraft, and today we're going to talk about the 1851 and the 1861 Navy and how they compare to each other. Stay with me. Okay guys, let's look at two of the great icons of the percussion revolver era. That is the 1851 Navy 36 caliber by Colt and the 1861 Navy 36 caliber by Colt. Now many people will look at this gun and initially think it's an 1860 Army because of the streamlined barrel, but the dead giveaway is the cylinder is not rebated. It doesn't flare out to the bigger caliber. Now the game began with this, and I'll give you a close-up here in just a second. Now this is the 51 Navy. It had the square trigger guard that was popular at that time on the Dragoon revolvers, which was the big money maker for Colt, and for the Baby Dragoon, which was the huge seller that was for the 49 Gold Rush and etc. and slipped in a pocket. So Colt was very much capitalizing on a branding, a style, if you will. The caliber was 36, and the standard load was somewhere around 20-25 grains of black powder over a conical bullet or a round ball. Now these guns, and please excuse the gunfire, it's hunting season in Alabama, dove season, and the fields around here got people shooting dove. So the gun itself was 36 caliber, and the initial name for this gun was originally the Ranger. And it didn't go that well because he was trying to capitalize on the Texas Rangers at that time. They had been a big buyer before, and he hoped they would jump on this because it was an improvement over the Colt Patterson that they had liked so much. But what really made it, and then you look on the cylinders, and you'll have an engraving pattern there of a naval engagement between the Texas Navy and the Mexican Navy. And that's the reason we call this the Navy model Colt. Yes, the U.S. Navy did buy some, but the Army bought these as well. But it became known as the Navy caliber 36 because of that. And this gun was hugely successful. This was the gun that Wild Bill Hickok liked to use. It was a favorite of many of the gunfighters of the Old West in the early days before cartridge, and even after cartridges came out. Many of these were converted to 38 long Colt, and well up into the 1890s you could still find some salty old dogs still packing one of these. They were very effective handguns for combat and for the use of that day. And after the Civil War there was tons of them available as surplus. Now many of the generals of the Civil War preferred this gun. It was thought that the 36 shot easier. It was easier to be accurate with due to its less recoil versus the more powerful 44. Now, in 1860, Colt had kind of jumped up his game. The Civil War was just beginning, and he had created the 1860 Army, which he took a 51 Navy. He cut the frame right here to allow a thicker, made a cylinder with a thicker ring and turned it into 44 caliber. And he had one, as I understand it, one prototype they bored out square barrel like this to be a 44 caliber. That was the prototype. But this new design was already on the horizon of this streamlined barrel. And here's a close-up of this one. Now, this streamlined barrel gave it a more graceful look. And when you initially look at this, you're going to think it's an 1860, like I said, but the cylinder is still a 51 Navy type cylinder. From here back, it's basically still a 51 Navy, except it's got the rounded trigger guard. And many of the 51s had round trigger guards. It was one of the early ones had these square trigger guards. Definitely by the mid-1850s, this has gone to a round trigger guard because people complained they couldn't get their finger into that guard. They had kind of a fat finger, it didn't want to go into that small opening. So, you know, Colt acquiesced and made a round trigger guard. Now, the 61 Navy was the improvement. So the 1860 Army, 1861, they took the 51 Navy and they created the streamlined barrel image for it. All the specs were the same except for the streamlined barrel. So you can consider it like an improved Navy revolver. and it was designated the 1861. And then in 1863, they took their pocket Navy and the 49 pocket model, etc., and they streamlined that and made the 1863 pocket police, which has this kind of streamlined barrel. So ballistically, these should be the same gun. There were very, very minor improvements between these two models. All you're looking at is a cosmetic, basically, change. Now, yes, the addition of the creeping loading lever was an advantage over the older style pin type lever. It didn't want to bind as bad, etc. There were minor cosmetic differences. There were also minor technical differences where they changed the forcing cone inside slightly. They went to this blade front sight as opposed to the pin front sight of the original. These were just little improvements where they had learned over time and they were applying it to this model. Much like in our modern era where you have this model car comes out, say a Mustang, and then 2 years later they change subtle little cues and it's got a bigger motor now and it's got a better this and a better that, and they make these improvements for 5 or 6 years before they radically change the look of the car. Well, that's the way that Colt did as well. Colt had a winner right here, and it was a very rugged and accurate pistol, and he wanted to keep that tradition but make it come up new. They didn't just quit making these 51s, they still made them for a while after they had started this, because the popularity of the 51 was so big. And long after the percussion era ended, let's say realistically 1870, because there were so many surplus guns flooding the market from the war. And so many gunsmiths had created cylinders or whatever to convert these over to percussion inspired but cartridge guns. We call these conversion guns. And they were being sold at a good price versus the new gun. So for example, a Colt Single Action Army was a $20 gold piece. You could pick up a surplus 51 for $2 or less, depending on where you were in the country. And so these guns soldiered on in the civilian market long after their day in the sun. And like I said, as I've read articles and stuff of really well documented, I think it was in the late 1880s, like 1886, 87, the last Colt percussion gun was left. Now, they had ceased production, but they still had parts. And they would assemble parts guns and put them out. And so you do encounter today in the collector's market something called a mismatched Colt. You could find a 61 Navy that had a square back trigger guard on it. Well, it was made up either by a gunsmith taking 2 broken guns and making one, or parts from the bins in the factory that some lower gunsmith had been asked to make something that was marketable, and these guns would be given to the Colt representatives so that when they were out on the frontier they could sell them. It's a not in production model, but we're getting some money out of the parts, see? So, when asked, which is better? That's up to aesthetics. If you're talking ballistic performance, they're almost identical. There are such minor differences between the two. You might as well just, it could be 2 of 51 Navies and they can be minor differences between the two, or 2 61s and there'd be minor differences between them. As to be a moot point. They're the same gun, it's just whether you want the improved model and streamlined or you want the original model. For my eye, to me, I've always thought that the 51 Navy with a square back trigger guard was the sexiest one of the bunch. And Colt loved it, but he said that his favorite was the 61 because of the look. Maybe that was a marketing ploy at the time. It was very close to him passing away. It was on the books and it just hadn't come out. So guys, I hope this gives you a fresh look at some of it. Please leave any questions or comments below. And a little later on, once it's a little cooler and I get the opportunity, I'll be doing some shooting videos where I'll compare these head to head over chronographs and etc. to see how they perform together. Till then guys, I'm Blackie for Shaman's Forge, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day guys.